Hey everyone, welcome. I appreciate you joining. Welcome if you are watching the recording. Welcome if you're live. Nice to have you all here. My name is Rick Smith. I'm a senior consultant with the Professional Services security organization at VMware. Today we're going to talk about automating things in the Carbon Black Cloud. So what can you do today? What can you do with some third-party tools? And what can you do yourself with some scripting? So we'll move right along. We're going to start with a poll. So just to kind of gauge everyone's experience so far. So what's your level of experience with the Carbon Black Cloud APIs? So your options are, I have no awareness, I'm aware, but I've never used them. I have used some tools and integrations that utilize them, but haven't personally created anything with them. And then the last choice here is you have created your own custom scripts and your own integrations and or your own integrations and you've used them. So if you could all fill out that poll, we'll take a look at your answers. And see what we get. Looks like so far, most folks are saying they are aware they exist, but have never used them. Well, if that continues, then you are in a good place because we're going to talk about them and maybe spin your wheels about using them. So welcome. All right, we'll move on here. Here's our quick agenda. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about some of the things you can do today, what's built into your console. Then we're going to talk about some Carbon Black supported integrations, so things that are already created that you could use. We're going to talk about the APIs themselves, what's available to do it yourself. And then we'll talk about some resources, and then we'll have plenty of time at the end for some Q&A. We'll start with some important notes. This content is related mostly to endpoint standard, enterprise EDR, and audit remediation. Right? These are things that customers typically ask with our professional services engagements. It's certainly not everything, right? And that's not every product that we have on the Carbon Black Cloud, but most of these things do apply to all of the products. But just for awareness, this is not everything. So starting with the built-in automations, again, what you can do today. I kind of categorize these into three sections here. So what can you do with agents or sensors today? You do have the option to auto deregister VDI sensors. So if you've installed them, as VDI sensors, there is an option to automatically deregister them when they're gone. This is really, really key when you're using VDI. You can also auto delete deregistered sensors, and you can do that for any type of sensor. It doesn't have to be VDI. Under the data section, we have specifically with the audit and remediation, feature or product, you can schedule live queries. So audit and remediation is all about queries. You can automatically run those queries on a time frame that you set. There's also a data forwarder, as many of you may know, right? So that can automatically send your data out to an S3, AWS S3 bucket. And then these are just your options here of the things that you can send out. And then lastly, in the data section, you can automatically send notification emails. And you have a few different categories depending on which products that you have. But again, just automatically sending this data out without you having to do anything. Lastly, for the built-in items, malware. So the first two are not actually enabled by default. So I do want to mention these, especially because you may want to toggle these on. Auto delete known malware, right? And you can set a time frame for when that auto delete occurs. In professional services, we do typically recommend that you set this if you're not yourself going manually deleting things. The second one is, again, it's an opt-in feature, right? So you can submit unknown binaries for analysis. Binary leaves your environment, it goes up to the Carbon Black Cloud and over for detonation, and it comes back with a result of that detonation. You do have to opt into that because data is leaving your premises, so to speak. But that is another thing that in professional services, we do recommend turning that on. Lastly, auto ban. I put a little asterisk on this one because it is enabled by default, but there is a lot of caution around this one. Auto ban means when an alert occurs at a score that you set, then the hashes associated with that alert are automatically banned. So presuming that you have a policy that blocks banned things, these are automatically terminated. You have to be really, really careful with this one. If you set your auto ban threshold to too low of a severity, you can easily see some very legitimate things being automatically banned. You don't want to have that happen. It's set to 10 by default, which is the highest, but the caution there is don't set it lower without knowing what you're doing. All right, we're going to move on and talk about some Carbon Black supported integrations. So things that we've built and we support. First thing is a Syslog connector. So this can be run on any machine that supports Python. So you can see there pretty much any modern OS. You can have it run as a scheduled task or a cron job. And effectively, or essentially what this does is automatically send your choice of your audit log or your notifications to a third-party system, right? So you have this running, it just does its thing for you, and there's not much else you have to tweak. It does support multiple Carbon Black orgs. So if you're like an MSSP and you support multiple orgs, you can definitely set it up to do that. I think the only real downside of this is you have to have a machine to consistently run this script. But if you have a test box or an IT type machine that you use for utilities like this, that'd be a great option. Moving on to the Splunk app. So for folks who have Splunk, we do have a supported, relatively new Splunk app that does all of these things. And I'm not going to read through all of these here, but essentially it can do automatic actions against your sensors, against your alerts, depending on what's coming into your Splunk console. It's very, very, very powerful. And a lot of customers who have Splunk do make use of this quite a bit. Next one we'll talk about here is IBM QRadar. So obviously very similar to Splunk and similar actions that you can take here within the QRadar console. So again, this is just like Splunk, pulling in data either through our APIs or through the data forwarder. And these are these different actions you can take based on that data that comes into QRadar. Now, those are the two that we support. There may be more coming. I don't want to spoil anything, but obviously third-party vendors are welcome to build their own, and we would welcome that. Let's talk a little DIY. Think of this as everything else, right? So these are the things that you or a integrator could do with the Carbon Black Cloud. And like I said at the beginning, this is not everything, but this is get to sort of whet your appetite about what are the possibilities here. And again, not going to read through all of these. I'll have a link here at the end that points to all this documentation, but I'll give you some of the highlights. The devices API, really this is, when I'm talking to customers, this is the one that usually comes up first. I want to be able to do more with the metadata I have about my sensors. I want to know, which ones are in bypass, which ones are on older versions, and maybe take some automatic action based on that. So devices API, very, very strong one. And I'll have a little demo of the devices API here in just a few minutes. The policy API, well, as it says, right, you can take actions, make changes to your policy, add policies, export policy settings, all that good stuff. The user management API, this is your console users, right? So your Carbon Black Cloud administrators, add users, delete users. Most folks, when they're using this, just want to audit that so they can have a report. Alerts API, pretty straightforward, just a road into your alerts so that you could potentially take an action based on those alerts. I'll have an example here at the end too about a bad idea as far as the alerts API, but we'll get to that in a second. Excuse me, the live response API. So this is pretty much every feature in the Carbon Black Cloud supports live response. Essentially actions you can take against machines in real time, right? So listing processes, stopping processes, grabbing files off those machines, all of that can be scripted, all of that can be automated. Vulnerability assessment API. So this is a newer feature to the Carbon Black Cloud to show patches that your machines might be missing and other vulnerabilities that have not been handled. So you can certainly, through the API, pull that data out, and then maybe you send an email to yourself or to your patching team. Live Query API. So again, this is a specific audit and remediation feature. Through the API, you can initiate those queries and pull back the data that comes from them. The next one for Enterprise EDR, watch this API. Those of you who have Enterprise EDR know why all of these things are here. So I won't read through all of them, but again, these are all accessible, all touchable through a script or an automated method. Last couple here for this, this section. Unified binary store, again, an EEDR specific feature. Opt in to have your binaries in your environment uploaded for your later analysis and download. Reputation override API. I probably should have had this one more at the front of this slide, because this is a pretty interesting one where you can automatically have hashes that you approve loaded into your console or banned, for example. Another really powerful one. And then the last one here, Sensor Update Services API. This is just upgrading your sensors, right? So you can do that through the Devices API, or this one here is for more of a bulk or batch jobs. All right, let's talk about some resources. If you take away nothing else from this presentation, or you bookmark nothing else, the first one here is what you want to know. Developer.carbonblack.com. Everything that we've talked about is documented here, and pretty much all the links down below are all linked off of that one. So definitely, yeah, thank you for putting those in the chat. I appreciate that. So definitely remember that one, bookmark it. Our developer team is, updating these things all the time, and they host other sessions. They have get-togethers with developers. Really, really active community. Okay, here comes poll question number 2. And I will admit this came from our developer folks. So this is a little bit of interesting information that they are looking for. So are you currently using a SOAR tool, a security, orchestration, automation, and response tool in your environment? And your options are, I am not familiar with SOAR, which is fine. I'm not interested in SOAR. We plan to, but haven't implemented one yet. Or the last option is, yes, we are actively using a SOAR tool. And while you're answering that, just the reason we're asking on this one is we're looking for what we're going to do next, right? What else we can integrate with, or what other integrations we can make available to other third parties. All right, almost 50-50, but we plan to, but haven't implemented one yet is the top answer, and running very close to second is I'm not familiar with SOAR tools. They're very interesting. All right, we'll move on here. We have a very short API demo, and I'll share my screen at this point. Yeah, thank you very much. All right. Get my PowerShell window up here. There we go. Okay, hopefully everyone can see this. I had to zoom PowerShell in quite a bit so that it can show up in a mostly readable way. So what we're going to do here is a very, very simple query against the Devices API. So if you were scripting this, you would have most of this information in variables, and this command would not look nearly as messy as it does. But just to kind of show the whole thing, what we're saying here is query this API route. Here's my credentials. I want to request 200 rows from this API, and we'll put all that data into this CB devices variable in PowerShell. I'll go ahead and run that. Nothing really happened, but I can tell you that CB devices just filled up with a bunch of information. We'll look at that. Quick side note, the reason I requested 200 rows is I don't really know how many machines are in this org. I could have done another query to ask that question and then know exactly how many rows I wanted to grab. But for the sake of this demo, we just grabbed everything. So let's look at what CB devices contains. Actually, let's look at how many things it contains. Right? So 122. We definitely pulled back enough, or we definitely pulled back some data, right? So let's look at the data for one of my machines. So let's look at results number one. Wow, look at all that data. Essentially what I've just pulled is every piece of metadata that I can see for machine, number one in my output. So all of these fields are what I now have access to. From this point, all the data is in PowerShell or whatever scripting language you prefer. And from there, we don't have to query the Carbon Black Cloud anymore. We can certainly do that, but for the rest of these purposes, we're just going to use the data that we pulled into here. The majority of these fields are documented on the developer site. So if you have any question about what they are, what the possible values are, that is out there. I will admit that not all of these are in use. So that you will sometimes see data here that doesn't really make sense. It doesn't show up in the Carbon Black Cloud, and that's okay. That's normal. All right, so that's the results from one. What else can we do with those results? So I've got a couple examples here, so I didn't have to type them. At a minimum, we could just dump those right into a CSV file. In fact, let me clear the screen out so it's a little bit less cluttered. All right, that command there in PowerShell anyways, exports that variable into Excel. And then let's just see what that file looks like. Did it not do that? I had some there. So all of those results in my PowerShell variable, I exported to a CSV file, and here they all are. So again, at a minimum, I have just pulled all the metadata about all of my devices right out of the Carbon Black Cloud and into something I could manipulate. And from there, the sky's the limit, right? What else could we do? Let's just look at some of the data here in the PowerShell window. Let's say I want to look at my OS versions. Pretty simple command, just look at my results in the OS field, some PowerShell magic to group them, and select certain columns, and here we go. Right, my 122 machines, I just broke them down by OS. There's also an OS version field. All right, that's pretty interesting. Pretty messy. So let's try to sort them. Clean them up a little bit, put them in alphabetical order. Again, this is all just in PowerShell or presumably the scripting language of your choice. We're not querying the cloud here anymore. And then let's do one more value, and then we'll close this out just to show what you can do with the status of your sensors, right? So from an automation perspective, this one is interesting, right? Because I'm seeing of my 122 machines what their various sensor statuses are. And I might be very interested to know when I have a machine in bypass, because in the Carbon Black Cloud, when a machine's in bypass, you have no protection, right? It's not doing anything for you. Well, in endpoint standard, I should say. So I might want to alert myself when the machine's in bypass. So to take this to the next step, what I might do is have this script running every 30 minutes, every 15 minutes, whatever's appropriate. And then upon finding a machine in bypass, maybe I turn around and have PowerShell send me an email. Or maybe I have PowerShell, drop something into Slack as an alert, or open a ticket with, an integration with one of my ticketing tools. So I can have somebody go out and figure out why this machine is in bypass. But you can do the same for the alerts API, and then take an action based on what that alert says. Very simple. Obviously, we don't have a whole lot of time to get into all of the possibilities here, but just wanted to, again, whet your appetite about how easy this can be just to pull some simple data out of the Carbon Black Cloud. All right, I'm going to stop this here, and then you can bring up the slides again. Thank you very much, Aaron. We value your feedback. Yeah, absolutely. We would love to know what other types of sessions, what other types of information you want to hear about, what types of things you like to attend. So please throw those ideas in our chat. Additionally, we're going to send you another survey, right? And let us know about this session. So while you fill that out, and again, please throw any other ideas you have into our chat. While you fill all of that out, we're going to transition over to our Q&A, which is here. So questions for me does not have to necessarily be about this presentation. Feel free to ask anything Carbon Black Cloud related. If there's something I can't answer for you, we'll try to find an answer and get back to you. I'll pull up my question window here. All right, thank you again for putting all those links in the chat. So while you're thinking of questions, I'll throw out a couple things that I'm commonly asked about during professional services engagements or even presentations like this. Give me an example of interesting or common API scripts in automations. So in my role, like I was saying earlier, most people want to talk about the devices API. And I would say the biggest thing people want to do is have a report that shows the last time machines have connected with the Carbon Black Cloud, right? So by default in the Carbon Black console, 30 days is the threshold where machines flip from being active to inactive. And for a lot of customers, that's not customizable enough, right? For their environment, maybe they have a VDI environment, maybe 30 minutes is their threshold. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll script into that devices API, we'll look at the last contact time from a sensor, and then we'll throw that into a report. And if machines haven't been seen for that threshold, maybe we send an email, maybe we do a deregister on that machine and then delete it. Anything could be, the sky's the limit, like I said before, about automating from that perspective. Question in the chat is the credentials to log in using PowerShell, where do we get them? Great question. So I skipped over that in the interest of time, but in your Carbon Black console, there is a section on your left side menu called API Access. And within there, you can create yourself these credentials. You can choose from different access levels. So for the purposes of this demo, I gave myself full access, right? But it's very customizable. You can create custom roles that those credentials can have, just so they only have access to what you need. So if you're just getting started, what you might want to do is create a view-only credential so that you can't make any changes, you can't really break anything, but it does give you access to pull out all the available data that you might be interested in. The end result of your creation of the credentials is two pieces of information, a secret key and an API ID. Those two things together effectively make up your credentials, and that's what you were seeing in the PowerShell command. Great question. Another one that I hear a lot is, other than Slack and QRadar, what else does Carbon Black Cloud integrate with? Well, Slack and QRadar are the ones that we support. I've just, I think last week, heard from a customer using Logarithm, and Logarithm themselves have built an integration using the Carbon Black Cloud APIs. And really that's what those APIs are there for. We can't build an integration for every tool that everyone's using. Splunk and QRadar are obviously one of the, two of the ones that are used very, very commonly. But the APIs are there for anyone to use, whether it be that vendor or yourself, making that type of integration. Another question in the chat is, where do I get the list of supported commands as an example to invoke get and post method via PowerShell? Great question, great question. So that is from, or you can get that from the developer site, developer.carbonblack.com. all of the API information for all of our products is in there, but obviously you want to look for Carbon Black Cloud. And then depending on which API route you're looking for, there are examples on all of those pages, all that documentation that give you an idea of whether or not you need to use a post, whether or not you do a get, and what the JSON body might need to contain. So there's some very, very good examples on that site. The majority of the examples you'll see there are written in Python. And in fact, there's linked on the other slide is a Python SDK, which is a great getting started option as well. So you don't have to write all the code yourself. You just use the code that's already written in the SDK and then run commands against that. The reason I use PowerShell, because in my role, I often need to just give customers something that they can run really easily, right? And not everyone has Python installed. Not everyone knows how to use it, but if people have a Windows machine, they have PowerShell, and it's just a matter of me giving them a few lines of code and they can just run it. So, again, most of our examples are in Python. If that's what you're interested in, if you work with me, we'll work with PowerShell. Great question. I'll give you another one that I'm asked about. So we talked about the Syslog forwarder, another supported integration, we support integration, right? What's the difference between what the data that one forwards and the data forwarder, which is something you can configure inside of your Carbon Black Cloud console. So the Syslog connector effectively gives you audit log information and alert / notification information. Not the alerts API, rather the notifications API, which is a little different. The data forwarder, though, is, you can think of that as almost everything, right? That is potentially every event that Carbon Black Cloud has captured from your machines is forwarded onto an S3 bucket. There are filtering options you can use to limit the amount of data, because obviously you'll be paying for that S3 bucket by the size of the data. So we do give you some filtering options to decide what you want to go over that route. But compared to there is no comparison to the Syslog connector, right? The data forwarder is everything, but it is limited to an Amazon S3 bucket. So if that's not what you're using, or you don't have the capability to use that, the Syslog connector can give you a crutch to getting some data out of here automatically. But again, going back to the APIs, that is a DIY thing you could do yourself. Right? If you want that data into another tool, you can potentially could customize a script to pull that data for you. Thank you for all the questions, by the way. Oh, I did mention earlier I was going to give you a bad example, right? And I forgot to mention that. So a bad example of an automation. I should hesitate to call this bad, but it is something you need to take caution with, right? One of the capabilities of the Carbon Black Cloud is to quarantine your endpoints, right? So if you're not familiar, what that means is effectively cut it off from the network, cut it off from the internet, cut it off from your local network. Web browser stop working, email stops working. To an end user, it's as if they pulled their network cord out. You cut their Wi-Fi off. So a really, really powerful tool. I have seen a few times customers request, and I have in fact scripted this, the ability to auto quarantine based on alert severity, right? So the thinking is, if an alert comes in and it is severe enough, we want to automatically cut that machine off from the network, automatically quarantine it, which, makes a lot of sense, right? But the caution is, if you don't script that right, or if there is some, influx of false positives or maybe even true positives, you potentially could be cutting off a big swipe of your environment from the network, from the internet, right? So you have to use a lot of caution when you take any of these actions on the machines that are impactful. So I shouldn't have said it's a bad idea, but it is something that you have to take care with. Any other questions? Okay. Did I have any other questions I wanted to mention? No, I don't think so. I hope to see you connect with us in professional services. I would love to speak to any of you. I do enjoy this work, and I do enjoy helping folks be really, really successful with the Carbon Black Cloud. So do hope to speak to you, and I hope this sparks your interest in some of the additional things that you can do using the Carbon Black Cloud. Some additional resources I'll mention here. We have a Carbon Black Cloud learning path on VMware Learning. There is a link. Oh, thank you for the links as well. There is a link here for an intrinsic security professional services. So that's me. VMware user groups. And then lastly, the Carbon Black, or the VMware Carbon Black community site. I'll take special note of that last one. If you are customers, I'm sure you're familiar with this one, but if you're not, this is a must-have account. Knowledge base articles, user forums with other users, threat research. It's a really, really great tool, and if you are a customer, definitely get yourself hooked in here. Okay. I don't see any other questions, so I will stop there. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks a lot.